Zando Penguin Audio presents The Killing Fields of East New York, the first subprime mortgage scandal, a white-collar crime spree, and the collapse of an American neighborhood, by Stacy Horn. Narrated by E.J. Lavery.
To our better angels, let's fix this. The only genuine, long-range solution for what has happened lies in an attack, mounted at every level, upon the conditions that breed despair and violence. All of us know what those conditions are: ignorance, discrimination, slums, poverty, disease, not enough jobs. We should attack these conditions, not because we are frightened by conflict, but because we are fired by conscience. We should attack them because there is simply no other way to achieve a decent and orderly society in America. President Lyndon Johnson, July 27, 1967. Poverty is the only crime society cannot forgive. Journalist Junius Henry Brown, 1869. There are other types of crimes of rapidly growing prevalence that are not only menacing to society in and of themselves, but which can fan the flames of violent crimes by the poor and are, to an ever-increasing degree, responsible for them. Robert M. Morgenthau, on White-Collar Crime, 1969. Mortgage fraud is bank robbery without a gun. Ann Fulmer, 2010. Prologue. 1991. In the early evening on July 17th, 17-year-old Julia Parker was sitting on the hood of a car at the corner of Pennsylvania and Dumont in East New York, when a gunman walked up, crouched behind her, and fired a shot into her head. She was taken to Brookdale Hospital, the same hospital where she was born and pronounced dead. Everyone was sure Julia was killed because she'd talked to the police about a friend of hers who was killed 4 days before. A detective said, if he was her friend's killer, I would probably do the same thing. It's very effective. My daughter didn't say a thing to police, said Julia's mother, Nancy Arlequin, believing, as everyone else did, that this is why her daughter was dead. She was defending her daughter's street honor to the unknown killer, and doing what she could to protect her remaining family. That year, 116 people were murdered in East New York. More than 3 decades later, 43 of the murders, including Julia's, remained unsolved. 1. The destruction of East New York, 1966 to 1969. The night was clear and warm when 10 young men, all white, gathered in the East New York section of Brooklyn on July 21, 1966. They were members of a loosely knit group calling themselves Sponge. They were the Proud Boys of their day. The name stood for Society for the Prevention of Negroes Getting Everything, or N-words, depending on who was listening. A racist witticism currently making the rounds. Led by the red-haired James McMenamin, known as Sandy, and his younger brother John, a.k.a. Johnny Reb, Sponge members converged on Frank's restaurant, located just before the apex of the triangle formed by Livonia and New Lots Avenues, to make what would become their last stand. It was a fitting location. The triangle was a famous location in East New York and a favorite hangout of a local neighborhood gang, the New Lots Boys, who counted a number of Sponge guys among their ranks. Frank's was their place, and one of the few remaining white holdouts in what had increasingly become a black neighborhood over the last 10 years. The Sponge guys were there to heckle Mayor John Lindsay, who was meeting with local leaders about growing racial unrest. While Lindsay was inside discussing how they could ease the tension, Sponge members carrying signs surrounded the place shouting, 2, 4, 6, 8, we don't want to integrate. The number of picketers soon grew to 35. Although the police hadn't been alerted to Lindsay's visit, word got out, and a police detail of 25 cops were sent to keep order. Lindsay left without incident, but the boys didn't come to chant slogans and go home. They wanted something to happen. The crowd continued to grow. When a group of black young men and boys came up from Warwick Street and made their way down New Lots Avenue, the sponge mob charged. The patrolmen were able to stop them, but this was a more organized protest than they'd realized. Shots were fired. As kids ran in all directions, the police were pelted with rocks from above. They'd later find caches of bricks, bottles, and Molotov cocktails stashed on the roofs. The crowd now numbered more than 100. A code 1013 was sent for Dumont and Ashford streets. Officer needs help. The cops who rushed to the scene found an 11-year-old black boy named Eric Dean lying in the street. His aunt, who'd heard shots, had seen her nephew clutch his stomach and collapse. He was just there to see the mayor, she said. Eric Dean was pronounced dead at Brookdale Hospital a few hours later. 3 more 1013s were called in that night as the fighting spread and continued. Over 1,000 officers eventually swarmed the neighborhood. Days later, the NYPD would send out a memo titled Unusual Disorder, 75th Precinct. Frank Fauci, the owner of Frank's Restaurant, told reporters there hadn't been any real trouble with the black people who'd moved into the neighborhood until last week when they bombed a cab service where the white kids used to hang out. From his point of view, the trouble only began when black residents fought back against ongoing resistance to their presence in Brooklyn. The Sponge Kids? Frank continued. Oh, they're just boys. There are about 20 of them, and there's no real harm in them. They're just kids. According to one Sponge member, the Negroes are breaking us up and trying to throw us out of the neighborhood. We're standing our ground and we're not leaving. The police report would say the crowd had grown to 200. 2 days after Eric Dean was murdered, Mayor Lindsay brought together 24-year-old Sponge leader James McMenamin, 35-year-old Vincent Jones, who was black, and Robert Benjamin, a 29-year-old who was Puerto Rican. Lindsay got the 3 men to shake hands and agree to a truce. I understand Mr. Jones has a lot of friends, McMenamin said, and he seems to be a nice fellow. I'll talk to my friends, and he's going to talk to his friends. Although Lindsay's gathering was credited with calming things down, another meeting entirely was responsible. After learning what had happened, a few of Lindsay's aides gathered to discuss how to respond. It was the first year of the Lindsay administration, and we were still novices in a lot of ways. Sid Davidoff, administrative assistant to the mayor, remembered. Dr. Frank C. Aracali, director of New York City's Youth Board, had told them that morning that he knew a guy who knew Albert and Larry Gallo, mobsters who had ties to the Genovese crime family. Let me see if the Gallos would be willing to have a word with the Sponge Kids, he said. They might not care what the police say, but they weren't going to ignore the Gallo brothers. It was an outrageous idea, but everyone agreed. Lindsay, however, was not consulted. East New York was essentially under martial law, but the police issued Albert Gallo a pass. We don't need the heat, Gallo told McMenamin. This is going to stop, right? When a member of Sponge replied with a racial slur, he was slapped to the ground. What choice did McMenamin have? Sponge, who'd always been considered attention-craving posers in the neighborhood, was no longer a problem for the Lindsay administration. The next day, when Lindsay gathered them in City Hall to meet with Black and Puerto Rican representatives, we had a very different meeting than we would have had. Lindsay would later defend Aracali from fierce criticism when word got out about how he'd addressed the situation. You can't always deal with people who are leaders in the Boy Scout movement. Sometimes you must call upon individuals with fairly rough backgrounds. I would have sent the devil in if I thought it would have worked, Davidoff says of their decision. We were in uncharted territory, but one thing we knew was the police were not going to solve it. They always say the police are your first line of resistance. It's actually your last line. 17-year-old Ernest Galashaw, a black boy, was later arrested for Dean's murder. Fauci was relieved. Just think if it had been a white boy who had pulled the trigger. But Ernest Galashaw hadn't killed Eric Dean. Dean's case was added to the growing list of unsolved murders in East New York, and it remains a cold case to this day. Reverend Joseph Judge of Our Lady of Mercy Church said, "The whites in East New York have to get over the idea that this place is theirs. It's our home, too. Another big problem, he said, was a lack of community organization.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?